Ever wonder just how many sounds make up a language?
Hmm, I never really thought about it.
Well, get ready to dive deep into the fascinating world of phonemic inventories.
Oh, wow. That sounds complicated.
It's not really once you get the hang of it.
Huh?
We're basically exploring all those unique sounds languages use to build words.
You mean like the alphabet?
Kind of, but it goes beyond just the letters we see.
So like what kinds of sounds are we talking about?
We'll be uncovering the diversity of these inventories across languages and what that means for learners like you and me.
So are we going to be like comparing different languages and stuff?
You got it. We're going to look at languages with tons of sounds and others with just a handful.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
And that's not all. We'll even explore how linguists crack the code of unwritten languages.
Unwritten languages, how do you even start with that?
That's the exciting part. But before we jump into all that, maybe we should start with the basics.
Yeah, okay. Where do we begin?
Well, first things first. What exactly is a phoneme?
So it's not just any sound, right?
Right. It's the smallest unit of sound that can change a word's meaning.
Oh, okay, I think I get it. So like in English, cat and hat are different because of the C and the H sounds.
Exactly. Those are different phones, and they completely change the meaning of the word.
That makes sense. So each language has its own set of these phones.
You got it. That's what we call its phonemic inventory. And these inventories,
Yeah.
they can be wildly different.
Really? Like how different are we talking?
Well, let's just say some languages are like minimalist sound artists, while others are full-blown orchestras.
Interesting analogy. So can you give me an example?
Sure. I said some languages have very few phones.
Yeah.
Well, there's this language called Rotokas.
Ritokas, never heard of it.
It's spoken on a tiny island in Papua New Guinea.
Oh, okay.
And guess how many phones it has?
I don't know, 20?
Try 12.
12, that's it.
That's all. They make do with just 12 basic sounds to express everything.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
I know, right? It really makes you wonder how they make it work.
Yeah, how do they create all the words they need with so few sounds?
Well, they've obviously figured it out, but it's definitely a testament to the creativity of language.
I bet. So what about those languages you called orchestras?
Those are at the opposite end of the spectrum. Languages with tons of phonemes.
Give me an example.
One example is .xo.
Exo, how do you even pronounce that?
It's a click language spoken in southern Africa.
Click language? What's that?
It uses clicking sounds as part of its phonemic inventory.
No way. So like actual clicks with your tongue?
Yep. And it's not the only language that does that. There are several click languages in that region of Africa.
That's incredible. So how many sounds does .so have?
It has over 100 phonemes, including all those clicks.
Over 100. That's a lot to keep track of.
I know. It's almost unimaginable to us, but it's just another day for speakers of .so.
So how does the number of phonemes in a language affect learning a new language?
Well, think about it. We tend to struggle most with sounds that don't exist in our native language.
Like clicks. I can't even imagine trying to learn those.
Exactly. And it's not just those exotic sounds. Even subtle differences in pronunciation can trip us up.
So like our brains just aren't used to hearing or making those unfamiliar sounds.
Right. It's like our ears have filters that block out anything that doesn't fit the pattern of our native language.
That makes sense. So how do we overcome that filter?
It takes lots of practice and exposure to the new sounds. Our brains are amazingly adaptable, but it takes time and effort to rewire them for a new language.
So basically, the more different the phonemic inventory is from our own, the harder it will be to learn that language.
Generally speaking, yes. But don't let that discourage you. It just means it might take a bit more time and patience.
I see. Now, what about those unwritten languages? How do linguists even begin to figure out their sounds?
That's where things get really tricky. It's like detective work. They have to rely on careful listening, recording, and analyzing the sounds they hear.
So it's all about patterns and variations, right?
Exactly. They listen for minimal pairs, words that differ by just one sound to identify phones.
I see, like our cat and hat example.
Precisely. And they also pay attention to how sounds change in different contexts.
Why is that important?
Well, it helps them distinguish phonemes from allophones.
Allophones, what are those again?
Remember we talked about subtle variations in pronunciation within a language?
Oh, right.
Like the P and pin versus spin. They sound slightly different, but don't change the meaning.
Yeah, I remember.
Those are allophones, different ways of pronouncing the same phone.
Got it. So linguists have to figure out all this for unwritten languages. That's a tough job.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It allows them to document and preserve languages that might otherwise be lost.
That makes sense. It's like piecing together a puzzle to understand a whole new way of communicating.
Exactly. And speaking of piecing things together, have you ever thought about how these phonemes change over time?
Hmm. Not really.
Well, they do. And by studying these changes, we can learn a lot about the history and evolution of languages.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, like, how do phonemes change?
Well, sometimes they split into two distinct sounds. Other times, two separate sounds merge into one.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure, the Great Vowel Shift in English is a classic example.
The Great Vowel Shift? What was that?
It was a major sound change that happened in English between the 14th and 17th centuries.
And it affected the vowels.
Yes, it's a big reason why English vowels sound so different from those in related languages like German.
I see. So by studying these shifts, we can kind of trace back the family tree of languages.
Exactly. It's like using sound clues to uncover the relationships between languages and how they've evolved over centuries.
Wow. I never realized that something as simple as a sound could tell us so much about the past.
It's incredible, isn't it? We've covered a lot of ground today, from the building blocks of language to unwritten languages and sound shifts through history.
Yeah, we really went on a journey through the world of sounds.
And that's the beauty of phonemic inventories. They not only shape the character of each language, but also give us a glimpse into the fascinating story of human communication itself.
I love that perspective.
So before we wrap up, I have one last thought-provoking question for you. If you were creating a brand new language, how many phonemes would you choose? Would you go for a simple, streamlined system or a more complex, nuanced one?
That's a tough one. I'd probably lean towards a balance of simplicity and complexity.
Interesting. And what kind of impact do you think your choice would have on the language's evolution?
Well, I guess a simpler system might lead to more rapid changes, while a complex one could result in a more stable language over time.
That's a great point. It really makes you appreciate the delicate balance between innovation and stability in language. So keep those ears open and those minds curious as you continue exploring the fascinating world of sounds.
I will. Thanks for taking me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.